We're going to have Chris come up next.
Good morning, everybody. Try to focus our attention here for a minute. I know we still have a lot of folks that are coming, that are out there still, but I want to get us rolling here sooner than later. I'm excited this morning to have the Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge team here with us. Pastor Rich Scherber is the president and CEO of the organization and has been a great inspiration to the work that we're doing here. Whether many of you know that or not, he's become a mentor figure for me to learn how to figure this complex system out. So he's been a wonderful asset to us, and many of you may have never even known that. First off, I haven't been able to stand in front of you guys lately, and just want to say thank you again for everything you do to make this ministry work. We could not do what we do without you, and it's more and more obvious to me every single day that we need the collective efforts of everybody in this organization to be able to do the work that we're doing. So thank you so much. I want to read a scripture that I've probably read it 100 times, but for whatever reason, it really impacted me in much more significant ways than it had in the past. And it's Psalm 90, verses 15 through 17. And it says, "Give us gladness in proportion to our former misery. Replace the evil years with good. Let us, your servants, see you work again. Let our children see your glory. And may the Lord our God show us his approval and make our efforts successful." Yes, make our efforts successful. For somebody who's going through this program, that verse means a whole lot to me, to see the part where it's talking about giving us gladness in proportion to our former misery and replacing the evil with good. And we see that happening in the lives of thousands of people through the efforts of everybody in this room. And I think it's great how the text ends with talking about making our efforts successful. And again, that is a team effort in this room and throughout our entire corporation, that we need everybody, and we need everybody's best to be able to push the mission forward and for the Lord to make our efforts successful. So I thank you all for your work in making that a reality. And I don't want to take any more time. I want to introduce Pastor Rich to come on up here. And Pastor Rich has been leading this ministry for a couple of decades, going back, and he's going to share the story of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge with us. It's a very inspiring story, and Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge has turned into the biggest teen challenge corporation in the world, and they're doing phenomenal work. So would you help me welcome Pastor Rich?
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. And let me start by saying just what an honor it is to be with you and how proud I am of what you're doing here in Rearsburg and across Pennsylvania. You guys are really trendsetters. And last year we had 3,030 different individuals go through one of our programs here in Minnesota. And as big as we are, listen, everybody, you're going to outgrow us. How many believe that? I know that's going to happen. And I'm so proud of Chris and your team, what you guys are doing. And let me share with you what we're doing. We started a licensed treatment program, jeepers, it was over 20 plus years ago. And so we've been doing this a long time. When we first started licensed treatment, there were a lot of cynics out there. There were people that felt we were going to hell in a handbasket. There were people that wrote letters that they should shut us down. But we just kept doing what we're doing. And to understand my heart, and I think you understand Chris's heart, I want to give you a little bit of background. And before I do that, I want to make sure that I acknowledge what's happening in Minnesota is not Rich Scherber. We have an incredible, incredible team of professionals. And this is what I told Chris when he came to me a number of years ago and said, we have a license program, but we want to do what you're doing in Minnesota. And I said, Chris, you start on the top. I said, you've got to get the best of the best that you can on the top. And I said, you need to treat them right, and you get them helping you, because we can't do what they do. And we were able, with the grace of God, God sent a team of experts, some of the best in the state of Minnesota, actually the best probably in the nation. And we have our clinical care director, our clinical director of our license treatment program, and then our long-term clinical director of the short-term and long-term with us here today. Our first hire was Saul Selby. Saul was clinical director at Hazelton Betty Ford Center, and he came on when our license program was small, and has done just an absolutely incredible job building this program. Our next hire was Dr. Tim Walsh. He's a licensed psychologist. He worked with the Department of Human Services in the state of Minnesota. He's also worked with the Department of Corrections in the state of Minnesota. He's very well known in the secular field. He was telling us he just a couple weeks ago lectured with the American Psychological Association in the Midwest and was one of their keynote speakers. These two guys have built a program as what it is today that we know. Last year, you heard seen the number of impact that the individuals that we have through the program. I brought this was passed out to our board last week, so it's fresh out of the oven. And we do KPIs on our program to watch how we're doing, our growth. The first one is our client satisfaction. Do you guys see this? Okay. Then we look to the right of it, the year-to-date program, our occupancy. How are we filling our centers? And notice our LA is Lakeside Academy. We started an adolescence license program that has been probably one of the more difficult programs. It is the most difficult program we run in Minnesota. We just opened this up a couple years ago and have been trying to get the bugs out of it, and it has been hard. That's all I can say, hard. Our next column down, completion rates, and I emailed Gary Blackard, our national president, yesterday, and with a copy of this, the national averages of completion rates, and these are on our long-term program, well, all of our programs here you can see, but on our long-term program, you can see across the state, other than Rochester, is up way close to the 60%. Just a couple days ago, Gary Blackard, when he was talking to the nation, and maybe Chris will inform you guys on this, the national office has basically their board endorsed license programming. There was a segment that wanted to disassociate license program with the Teen Challenge model, and the national board said that won't happen. And Gary Blackard said we need to become better, because nationally our completion rates are about 25%. Look at what license program working in sync with long-term program, we're up near 60%. Some of the programs are up 68, 70%. So it shows you're going to have a better success. Then you can see the rest of the KPIs on there. But I wanted to show you the completion rates, because I think your completion rates are going to get better as you sync your programs together. We have a little motto in Minnesota. We call it one team, one dream. And it's not license program over here and prevention over here. And by the way, we run the largest prevention program in the state of Minnesota. Last year, we're in front of about 60,000 kids across the state of Minnesota in high schools and junior high schools. All of that program is offered absolutely free. And so we do that. It's just an act of love, and it gets our name out there. Last year, and over probably the last 5 years, on average, we've been, the 5 major news networks are ABC, NBC, CBS. We've been on the television news broadcast on either the 6 or 10 o'clock news over 100 times in major news stories. Not one of them has been negative. Every one of them has been positive. So I just commend you. Everybody look at me. God bless you. God bless you. I know in Minnesota when we first started license program, there were some of the old timers said, we're not in favor of this and we don't want this. And we just basically said, this is the way Minnesota is going. If you like it or not, either you get in on board or get off board, but we're not changing. And there were many that got off board, and I thank God that we have stayed the course, and we're touching a lot of people. I want to end with this before I start a little bit of the history of Minnesota Teen Challenge. It was about 1.5 years ago that we invited the Commissioner of Health and Human Services for the state of Minnesota. I mean, these are billion-dollar budgets, as you know. The Commissioner of Health and Human Services is the largest state budget she runs, and then all of her deputy commissioners, and we invited them over for a tour. And the commissioner at the last minute couldn't come, but she brought all of her deputy commissioners, and we showed them all of our program. We showed them our short-term program. By the way, there are people in the Teen Challenge world that look at these DHS officers as enemies of Teen Challenge, enemies of the gospel. We look at them as partners. And we brought them over, showed them our prevention program, showed them our outpatient program, showed them our short-term license treatment program, showed them our long-term program. Then we showed them our aftercare program, everything. After 1.5 hours, 2 hours, we brought them into the boardroom and we said, we're an open book. Are there any concerns in what we're doing? And there was this pause, and they said, no, Mr. Scherber and Saul and Tim, we love what you guys are doing. And I said, what about the faith piece? We're a Christian model. And I don't remember, maybe one of you guys remember who it was. One of the deputy commissioners said, why would we have a concern with the faith piece? He said, every treatment program in Minnesota has integrated spirituality. It's a requirement. Why should we be concerned with you? No, we love what you're doing. I said, they were getting up to go, and I said, before you go, please, is there anything, any concerns, anything? We want to hear it now. There was this long pause, and then finally one of them said, Mr. Scherber, to be honest, the only time we ever hear Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge mentions is in reference to best practices. Did you hear? What's wrong with that? Right? I just want to, again, God bless you. For some of you, this is a little bit, some think mission drift or whatever. I'll tell you what, we were just talking on the way over, 2/3 of our commitments. I go to the largest or second largest Assembly of God church. That's where me and my wife attend in the Twin City area, Minneapolis and St. Paul. The last 2 baptisms they've had over 6 months. They have a baptism in the first service and in the second service. The first service is where we attend, so the baptisms, both, this is their church baptism. The first 2 baptisms, or the first service baptisms in the last 6 months, guess where 90% of the baptism candidates came from? How many want to guess? Teen Challenge. Just our Teen Challenge ladies, by the way, because the men don't go to that church. So we're seeing more people, 2/3 of our responses to the gospel are coming from our individuals who are in the short-term program are coming. And we're here to look at what you guys are doing. We're here to look at the detox program, and we're looking at integrating something like that in the Twin City area, so keep us in prayer today. Chris asked me to share a little bit, and I waited hesitantly to introduce my wife because she is integral to what I'm going to talk about in a minute, and give you a little history of myself. I did not grow up in an evangelical Christian home. I was forced to go to a parochial school when I was younger. I hated it. I hated the Christian message. There was just something about it. I hope it was all right to say I grew up Catholic. My aunt is a nun. My brother went to Crozier Seminary. My whole family was, but they were religious drunks. My dad had the foulest mouth. You couldn't carry a conversation on with my dad for 5 minutes without hearing curse, profanity, and yet they were churchgoers. And they put me in a church where a prodigal school. I absolutely hated it. The nuns were abusive to me, and there's one of the largest businesses where I grew up. The guy that owns the business invites Teen Challenge to come every year, and then he invites all the community leaders to come. So it's an auditorium like this, and it's packed, and there's usually about 400 to 500 people there, and there's a mayor and everyone, and he gets up, and this is the way he introduces me. He said, "My father was the chief of police of Rogers, Minnesota," and he said, "I remember as a child hearing my dad talk about a story about a delinquent boy by the name of Richie Scherber," that's me, "who tried to burn the school down, and it was like a 4-alarm fire." And he said now he runs one of the largest treatment programs in the state of Minnesota. And I say that shamefully. I hated Christians. I didn't buy into it. My priest, actually, I don't want to talk about that, abused me as a child, and that was my representation of the gospel. And after I tried to burn down the school, they kicked me out of the school, put me in the public school system, and I gravitated to the worst group of kids I could. And I have a long history of juvenile delinquency. Luckily, that didn't carry over into my adult. I was able to skirt the law and keep most felonies off my record. When I was adult, make a long story short, I used hard drugs for 5 years, but for 3 years, until I was 22 years of age, it was every day, night and day. I lived for drugs. I was a long-haired hippie drug dealer. I was on my way to, as I said, I didn't grow up in an evangelical Christian home. If you would ask me at 22 years of age what it means to be saved, I never been witness to. I knew nothing of the gospel, nothing. And I was on my way to a drug. I had a cousin who had gone through Woodstock, and she introduced me to drugs when I was early 12, 13 years old, and then she had went heavily into the drug scene, traveled the nation as a hippie, and then became a Christian through the Jesus People movement, told me about the gospel. And it was just sort of short little witnesses, but I was on my way to a drug deal one night. I had a half a kilo of marijuana in my trunk and a whole bag of pills, and I was sitting on a street, and some Christians had targeted that street for an evangelistic effort, and there were sometimes on that street there'd be 300-400 kids, and they'd meet in the downtown area, and then they go out to different lakes for partying, and I sold a lot of drugs out there, and so I was on that street, and that night they shared the gospel message with me as I was waiting for some contacts to go and meet to sell the drugs out of the party. And this was their message to me. There's a God. He'll prove himself to you. And I said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a God. I hate Christians. And they said, it's not who we are, it's who he is. And they said, he'll prove himself. And they prayed with me on the back of my car in front of 100 kids. People knew me. and God made himself real. It was so real that night. And the next day I went home. I had grabbed all. I had I don't know how many marijuana plants under heat lamps that were I was cultivating. We cut all our. I went and cut all my marijuana plants down. I took all my drugs and I put it in a big pile. And I remember looking up and saying, God, I don't know who you are, what you are. If you're real, take these drugs out of my life. And it wasn't fun anymore. And that night or that morning, I heard screams coming out of that fire. And to this day, it wasn't an exaggeration. It was so real to me. And I started serving the Lord. And I applied to go to Bible school. My brain was so fried from drugs. And they wouldn't even let me in the local, they call it North Central University in North Central Bible College back then. They wouldn't let me in. My grades were solid D's and F's. And they said, you have to go through you're going to have to get your GED. And I did that, and they let me in for 1 quarter. And it was so hard because after years of addiction, my brain was so fried. And so I got discouraged, and I quit, and I traveled across the United States with a ministry that was part of like the Jesus People movement in a tent, and I was a tent boy, and I lived in the back of semi-trucks and did street ministry. I did that for 3 years, and I met my wife, Lynette, and she said, after we met, she said, Rich, you need to go back to school. And I said, no, I'm dumb. I can't do this. And she said, you are not dumb. You can do this, Rich. And and she said, I'm going to help you, and you're going to go back to school. Or not. She said, we'll pray about this. You're going to go back to school, and I'm going to help you. And I went to Seattle, Washington. I went to Northwestern College, one of our largest Assembly of God school colleges across the nation. I graduated on the dean's list. That's the top 10% of my class. When we came back, I went to a graduate program at the University of Wisconsin in psychology and counseling. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA. So I'm not dumb, amen? Like a lot of and we felt this call. We pastored for a few years in Minnesota, and then we felt this call to missions, both of us. So we met with the Assembly of God Mission Board, and I said, I'll go anywhere. And they said, would you be willing to go to one of the most violent places in Africa at the time? It was called South Africa. It was during the apartheid period. They said, none of our missionaries want to work inside those black townships. They said, we got 30 missionaries, Assembly of God missionaries in South Africa, and there's 38 million people, and we've only got, I think, 2 of them that are working with the blacks inside the township. And they said, we need evangelists to go. And I said, send me where nobody else wants to go. And for 4 years, almost 5 years, we worked inside those black townships doing evangelism. We had a large tent, and God gave us, I don't want to spread I'm sure it was over 30,000 adult decisions for Christ in those crusades. We seen God do, favor of God and miracles of God. And I'm an evangelist by heart. I want to touch people with the gospel. I want people to know what I know. And we came back on furlough, and I was visiting all the churches that were supporting us, and it was about 3 months before we were supposed to leave for the fields. It was Nelson Mandela was still in prison. The black townships where I was working were some of the most violent in all of South Africa. As I watched people murdered. I would work in townships of 30 to 50,000 people every day without ever seeing another white face other than South African police that would come through in armored vehicles. And so we were wondering and praying, should we go back to South Africa because it's getting more violent? And one day I got a call, actually one night, from a guy we had talked to about support, and he said, Rich, can we meet tomorrow morning? And I said, he said, can you come to my church tomorrow morning at 7:30? He said, I'd like to talk to you. And I'm thinking maybe he wants to talk about support or whatever, and he said, bring your wife with. So me and Lynette showed up at the church at 7:30 in the morning. And as I walked in the foyer of the church, it's a city, like a storefront kind of church. And as I walked into the foyer, there was a table just like this with 7 men sitting around the table. And I knew about half of them as pastors. They were AG pastors. And the Minnesota superintendent was there. Dr. Argue, he was a president of North Central Bible College. He was there. And And I was wondering, while all these guys are there, and they said, Rich, come here, we've been waiting for you. And I said, I thought we were going to talk about and go to breakfast. And they said, no, we wanted to have this meeting. And they said, have you ever heard of Teen Challenge? And I said, yeah, I know the story of David Wilkerson, the cross and switchblade. And I said, before we left for Africa, they were trying to get a Teen Challenge going in St. Paul. And I said, I think the church we were involved with bought them a washer and dryer. And they said, well, before we say anything more, we want you to read this. So I don't know if you can bring up the slide. They threw it on the front page of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and on the front page was, you guys have that? So I should have checked it. Yes? No? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, anyhow, I'll keep going. But if you find it, I think I sent some slides over for, and on the front page of the Star-Tribune was an article about a minister who was being sued for sexual misconduct, and it didn't mention Teen Challenge, but it mentioned the denomination it was with, I read that, and when I was all done reading it, they said, that's our Teen Challenge director, and it talked about two women who were suing the denomination and the inner city church that this guy was involved with, and they said, this guy was our Teen Challenge director as well, so they said, Rich, these two women, and actually they said two other women now have joined the lawsuit, so now there's 4 women. They're suing the denomination, the Assemblies of God, they're suing the church that he was with, and they're suing Teen Challenge. And they said, we don't have proper insurance to cover this. And I said, they said that the litigation will probably, with these 4 women, be up close to $1 million. I said, well, whatever happened to that home on the washer and dryer? They said the previous director sold that. He never did open it. The money is all gone. I said, now, what kind of financial shape are you in? And they said, we're about $30,000 in debt. Bills haven't been paid for months. They said, this meeting is actually to talk about filing for bankruptcy because we don't want any of the board members to be involved if there is a lawsuit because there isn't insurance to cover this. And I said, do you have anything? And the guy thought for a minute, and they laugh, and now we laugh, but they said, well, one of the guys said, well, we own a Kirby vacuum cleaner. Back then they were worth, $600-700, and an old 286 IBM computer. He said that's all that's left of the ministry up there. And actually the church had let them use one of their rooms upstairs. And so I said, well, what does this have to do with me and my wife? And they said, well, Rich, we've been praying about it. And they said, we're interested. Would you take the leadership? And I said, well, can you pay anything? And they said, Rich, there's nothing here to pay. They said, and I said, well, so let me think about this. I said, you're making the front page of the Star-Tribune. You're going to be sued up to $1 million. You don't have proper insurance. You're $30,000 in debt. All you own is a Kirby vacuum cleaner, and you can't pay me a salary? I said, what an honor. Yeah. This thing should have been shut down. I mean, there was no governance back then, and they just sort of trusted the director, and he raped the ministry and then walked away. And we got the giggles at the table, and I think everybody at the table was of the mindset, we're just going to close Teen Challenge down. There's nothing there. And the more we began to laugh, everybody was laughing except the one guy who would call us the night before, and the more we began to laugh, the angrier it got. And finally, this guy just got teary-eyed and shaking, and he was looking at him, and he said this. He said, they moved the Teen Challenge offices into my church here, and he said, since this thing happened a month ago, he said, I've been talking to the people on the other end of that phone line. And Lynette will share that we were right next to the room where the Teen Challenge office was, and that phone never stopped ringing, even at 7:30 in the morning. And this guy began to weep. He said, Rich, he said, that's our mission field. He said, look where you came from. He said, look what you did in Africa. He said, we need somebody to take this over. He said, would you at least pray about it? I said, all right, we'll pray about it. anyhow, we ended up praying about it, and it was actually that same night me and my wife, we pray every night before we go to bed, and so I end up leaving that meeting in the morning. We sort of forgot all about we never did go to breakfast. The whole meeting lasted 15 minutes. I went home. I completely forgot about the meeting. And at night we went to bed and we prayed that God would get us back to Africa and raise our budget and touch our kids and touch our family. And I don't know if Lynette or me, one of us prayed at the end, Lord, if there's anything with this teen challenge, show us. And we went to sleep. And I was sound asleep, and around, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in there, I woke up, and those of you married, you know if your spouse is awake. And I could tell after she rolled over or whatever, and I couldn't go back to sleep. And finally I said, Lynette, what's the matter? Can't you sleep? And Lynette sat up in bed, and she said this. She said, Rich, I haven't slept one wink all night. She said, God has so burdened me. She said, we need to come off the mission field. She said, I want you to pray about this, and let's start Teen Challenge. And I said, Lynette, they can't pay us a penny. I said, we're going to lose our support if we come off the mission field. I said, how are we going to live? And she said, I'll get a job teaching. You go start Teen Challenge. And I want to say a thank you, Lynette, because that was the breath of fresh air that kept this ministry alive. Did you guys ever? There we go. That was we found the slide. Well, you can see there, I blotted out the name of the individual. I don't want to be sued. That was the article they showed us. The next slide, you can see. Well, what happened is, why don't you go back one? But anyhow, what happened is it was a couple weeks later. The guy who was actually he had gone through Teen Challenge with David Wilkerson here in New York. He might have even come here. I'm not sure. His name was Alex Cordero. He was a Hispanic. He was the chairman of the board. He was pastoring a little Latin American church in St. Paul, and so he was the chairman of the board. And he was sitting in a coffee shop just a couple blocks from where we had originally met in that church. And he was sitting next to a guy, and this guy was, every other word was an F word and a swear word, and this guy was saying, I have a house, and I wish I could find a charity I could give it to. And so Alex interrupts this guy and says, you have a house to give away? And he said, yeah. He said, well, we'll take it, without seeing it or anything. And he says, yeah, give me your, and the guy was all happy. He said, can you give me a tax-deductible receipt? Oh, yeah, we'll give you a tax-deductible receipt. And so the guy gives him Alex gives this guy my name, and he says, this guy is going to call you. So I get a call from Alex Cordero, our board chairman. I mean, I hadn't even, been there weeks, and Alex says, Rich, we found you a house, and he said, it's great. It's a good start for you. And so he said, go over to this address, 3021 Clinton Avenue. Isn't that interesting? The original Teen Challenge on Clinton Avenue. 3021 Clinton Avenue, there's a house. He said the guy who's waiting there, he wants to give it to you. So I drove over to the house. There you can see it. Clinton Avenue is one block off of Lake Street, what was at that time the worst, most dangerous spot in all of South Minneapolis, probably of Minneapolis. Clinton Avenue, this block was called Crack Alley. Back then there wasn't a lot of heroin in Minneapolis. Everything was crack cocaine. And of the 12 or 13 homes that were on the street, half of them were boarded up. There was one of the largest pornographic bookstores and strip joints they since shut it down, put the guy in federal prison, Ferris Alexander. That was just a couple houses up the street on Lake Street. I mean, so I passed this strip joint, and there's all these women, there's prostitution everywhere going on the street, and I pull down the street, and there's our first Teen Challenge resident. Guy standing out there with a clipboard. You can bring up the next slide. And he has me sign what they call a quitclaim deed. And he can't wait for me to sign fast enough to get in his car. And I said, wait, I want to see it. And he said, no, here, you sign it. I talk to your board chairman, it's yours. And so I took the quitclaim deed and walked up to the door of the house, and I found this. And in the city of Minneapolis, if a house is condemned, that means you have to bring it to brand new code construction. All of the requirements for building anything from a condemned house. It's like you're tearing it down from scratch. You build everything up to code. And what happened with this thing is that it was a nightmare because just the steps, for example, were down. It was like a 20-foot or 15-foot staircase, and you had to put a barrier in between. And I mean, it was just, you couldn't make it happen. It was a nightmare. And so I got the inspector over there the next day, and he came and he said, let's go inside. I hadn't even walked inside, and as we walked inside, he said, here, look at, he said, I brought a screw gun, but I said, we don't even need that. He said, look at the windows are on hinges. He said, crack house, crack house, crack house. And so he grabs a little ladder that they had that was laying in the weeds, and he puts it up against the window. He walks inside, and there's this, he flips open this window, and we walk inside. You can bring up the next slide. You can see, I mean, not all of these pictures are, some of these I pull off the internet because I don't have pictures, but this is identically what you see. I mean, they had used this house is full of feces. There was active prostitution and drug dealing going on with that. A house that was the drug house on the street had been condemned for years. And I mean, it was animals didn't live in filth and squalor like this. They had mats there, laid down in every room where they were doing prostitution. You can bring up the next slide. You can see, so the inspector starts going through the building, and as we walked in, you could see light from the lower level up, and he said, look at the roof, and so it had been condemned for years, so you could see the water had gone down, and it was hardwood floors in there. Some of the hardwood floors from years of raining on it were just bowed everywhere. It stunk to high heaven in there, mold, and as I said, you could see the roof had caved in, and see all the mold. Go up the next slide. Cracks in that old plaster, and so the inspector says, he said, Rich, you got to start from the top. He said, all of this roof has to come off, 100% of this. He said, these walls are plaster. Do they have plaster here in Pennsylvania? That's concrete and sand. One shovel of this weighs 10 pounds. I mean, he said, you're going to have to take a claw hammer. You're going to have to knock all this plaster off, this whole fourplex. And he said, all that behind that plaster is lath. He said, that all has to come off. You can bring the next slide. You can see, he said, these are all lead-based windows. None of this is going to pass code. Brand new windows you have to have in all of the building. The next slide. Down there, he said, there's an old gravity stove. He said, that's none of those code anymore. You got to pull that out. You're going to have to put a brand new heating system. And he said, all that is wrapped in asbestos. He said, you got to get asbestos abaters out here to do that. He said, that is not cheap. You have to get that done before you even start construction. The next slide. I mean, you could see the insides. It was just terrible. The next slide. Because of the rain that had gone down, the joists on the floor were all rotted. He said, you have to pull all these joists out of, so after you got this thing, then you pull off your hardwood floors, then you start repairing the joists on the floor. Does it mean, you guys, you get it? This is a construction nightmare. I mean, you're insane. The next slide. The plaster. I mean, the problem was that they had gone through several executive directors. Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge was, to the average Assembly of God church, was a nightmare. And another ministry called Metro Hope, a guy by the name of Al Palmquist, and he wrote a book on prostitution in the Midwest, and he was the cat's meow. I mean, Midwest Challenge, and they're not a teen challenge, and they were everywhere, and everybody, every church I'd talk to and say, can you support Teen Challenge? Can you help us? No, we support Midwest Challenge. We support Midwest Challenge. I couldn't get a handful of volunteers to help me, and if you know anything about pulling lath and plaster, you bang with a hammer, and that stuff is solid concrete. And then the next slide, you can see the lath is harder than the plaster. And there were nails every 12 inches, 15 inches you have to pull out. And And they were big, long nails going in. I mean, I'd work just to clear in a space not much bigger than that. I'd work an hour just to clean that up, that wall. I'm working there day after day. And to make matters worse, when we came off the mission field, we had determined that we were going to take our family vacation. And we worked hard in South Africa. I mean, hard. Long hours, hard. And I promised my 2 little girls, I say, I come back, Daddy's going to take you on a big vacation. Now I'm working on a crack house, working 15-hour days, and I can't even take my daughter and kids on a vacation. And the bills start piling up, and I'm going to go here quick, but you can bring up the next slide. I mean, it's just, these are pallets. How many know what a pallet is? That's how that's the only lumber I had to work with. I would pull pallets apart, honest to God, so we'd have lumber to work with. There were no tools. So Teen Challenge, there wasn't money. I'd go over with my own money. I'd go to a local Kmart and I'd buy a skill saw and hammers and table saw. And the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 times I'd leave them in the building. I'd come back the next morning, all my tools are gone. Because they had broke in there, stole all my tools. The next slide. Stupidity. Can you see this? Quitters never win, winners never quit, but to those who never win and never quit, you're idiots. 6 months going nowhere, getting deeper in debt. The estimates were coming in $15,000 for electrical, $15,000 for plumbing, $20,000 to repair the roof, $20,000 for windows, another $10,000 to do the stucco work on the. I mean, it's going deeper, deeper, deeper. Teen Challenge don't have a nickel. I mean, it's coming overwhelming. And I went to one of the largest Assembly of God, one of the largest guys, owns one of the largest heating contracting companies in Minneapolis. I went and said, he's an AG guy. I went and met with him. I said, man, you're an answer to prayer. I said, I need your help. What's that, Rich? And he said, I'm taking over Teen Challenge. He said, yeah, I heard about that. And he said, yeah. He said, I support David Wilkerson. I said, well, David Wilkerson don't help me. I said, I need your help. And I started telling him what we're doing, and I said, I need a heating system. And I said, some of your guys told me about you, and they said they would be willing to come on a Saturday and donate their time to help us. And he said, well, Rich, he said, the union won't allow that. I said, okay. And I said, he said, I'll come give you a quote. And I said, you know, we don't have any money. I'm doing all this, and don't worry, I'll come give you a quote, and I'll help you. We came and gave his quote, and it was about 2 months later, and the lady brought in her mail, and we had like these $15,000 quotes for the heating system and everything, and it was one of these Fridays I'd work all week long hours, and then Saturday I got a crew coming to volunteer to help, and this lady comes in, she brought in the mail, and she said, Rich, the heating contracting quote came that you've been waiting for, and I said, well, praise God, and I'm back in this corner of the far end of the building where it's pitch dark, and I've been pulling plaster off the ceiling. Does anybody know you put like a 2x10 or a 2x8 up through the joists, and then I jump up on top and pull down all this plaster is hitting my head, so it's dusty. You can't see a foot in front of you. I'm bleeding all over the place. I've been working all morning in there, and I can't even. Lynette would tell you, I'd come home at night. I'd cough till 2 in the morning, getting this junk out of my chest, and she comes and she says, you got that heating contracting quote from that Assembly of God guy? I said, praise God. She said, well, Rich, you're not going to praise God when you see this. And she left the mail and she walks out, and I grab this heating contracting quote and I look at it. And out of the, 7 or 8 heating contracting quotes that I got, his was the most expensive. And I took that heating contracting quote, and I remember looking up, and I cussed at God, and I said, I came off the mission field. I said, I've laid on my life, God. And I grabbed this thing, and I threw it out, and I tore it up, and I said, you can have your stinking Teen Challenge. I am done here. And I'm back. I mean, I think, I don't know if I had a miniature nervous breakdown. I mean, I cried till my guts hurt. I'm just bent over, just sobbing. And I hear a car pull up in the back, and this guy's at the door, and he's yelling, anybody here, anybody here? And I'm way in the far end of the building, and I yell, I'll be there, and I make the maze to the front. And the guy says, I'm looking for Rich Scherber, the executive director of Teen Challenge, and I've just been sobbing, and I'm bleeding, and I'm dusty and filthy dirty and full of snot. And I said, I'm him, how can I help you? And he said, my name is John Kepke, I own Central Heating. And he said, we were called to give a quote. We're the largest heating contracting company in Minnesota. And he said, I'm sorry I'm late. He said, what are you doing here? And I started telling him I want to take this house, and I want to do this. And he said, well, what kind of funding do you have? I said, we get no funding at all. We have nothing. And he looked at me, and he said, well, Mr. Scherber, how are you going to do this? And it sort of flashed back. I'd just been sobbing for 15 minutes, and I looked at him, and I said, Mr. Kepke, I guess we're going to believe God. And I started just sobbing again. And I look at this guy, a big alligator, tears are coming down his cheeks. And he looked at me, he said, I just left my wife, she's dying of cancer, I'm a Roman Catholic. He said, if you're doing all this to help these people, he said, the least I can do is donate a heating system. The first of our miracles. I can't tell you, we're out of time, but let me tell you, we counted $70,000 worth of donations came in the next 2 to 3 months. Miraculously, walk on water. I mean, miracle. One of them, I'll tell you, just 2 days later, I'm walking out of we had a little phone there where there wasn't even electricity in the building, but a phone there, and the phone was ringing, and it was, I picked it up, and the guy says, this Richard? I said, yes. He said, my name is such and such. I'm from Sterling Electric. He said, just so you know, your $15,000 application has been approved. I said, what application? He said, someone about 3 months ago put in an application to donate a heating or electrical system for a building. And he said, you just won the award. We're going to give you $15,000. God did it. God did it. Since that day, our growth has gone doom, 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 doom. You may be in your valley today. Don't give up. Don't give up. We're so proud of this guy. You pray for Chris. And I'll tell you what, the bigger the level, the bigger the devil. The devil don't like what God is doing here, but I'll tell you what, God is using you. Thank you, guys. We love you. Thanks for your support.
Well, I can tell you, as you can see, a very inspiring story and an inspiring beginning. And as Pastor Rich said, you know, us starting where we're at, and for all of us, we also know the many needs that we have. And these guys now, like I said, starting from that to now being almost a $50 million corporation and the largest teen challenge on the planet. You know, the couple of things that I think of, the very first thing I think of saying is praise the Lord. Look what God has done, and look what he continues to do through the work of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. And they are the ones who are really helping us along this path and this journey with encouragement, and with more than just encouragement, with resources for our success. And we are doing the things that Rich tells me to do, and that is finding excellent people to be able to do this excellent work. And we're building this team with excellence. And I'm looking forward to the coming days and coming years to see how the plans in Minnesota have unfolded, and how that's going to be moved over in this direction. So I hope that this is inspiring for you to see that all of the many struggles that we experience on a daily basis in this startup type of phase that we're in, look at the reward, and look at the amount of people now that they're able to serve, which is even thousands more than we are, and we're just at the beginning. So I'm so thankful for each of you, the work that you are doing, and I'm excited and eagerly expecting the Lord to do great things. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.